Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Michael. It's wonderful to be here. If you don't mind, I'm not going to begin right away because I have to take off my tie because I don't want to be the only one in this large audience to wear one. England is not the same as I remembered it, and I was born here. I'm not going to take off anything else simply because the kung fu costume that I'm wearing under my shirt and suit is extremely ugly and badly designed. Now, as Michael kindly mentioned, I have been privileged to work with a lot of people and started my office with Tom Geismar and Robert Brownjohn, who some of you might remember, because he was here for a long time, shaking up the advertising world. We had built up with a lot of young people who went out on their own and became very well known. We have an alumni from my office of 200 now, about, which is a lot of young designers. Very few of them gave up design. A few of them are probably driving cabs because they were terrible, but mostly they were very, very good. And we built our office up to roughly 35 people until about 2.5 years ago, when our rapacious landlord decided to make our office into a condominium, and we had to move. And at that moment, Tom Geismar and I said to each other, you know, don't you think it's time we, as we have to get out of here, that we think about what the hell we're doing anyway, and stop being the victims of the bureaucracy of our own making, which we were with that many people. So we split up our office, and Tom and I took the very best people that we had with us, who were really superb, and cut ourselves down to 10, wishing that we'd done it decades before. But we've given up things that are very low on creativity and very big on following through, like exhibitions and signage and wayfinding. The good part is about 5 to 10%, and the rest is fairly boring and involves a hell of a lot of meetings, which both Tom and I hate quite a bit. Unfortunately, design is a service operation after all. We're working for other people and trying to help them with their problems, and we're not painting or that private, although the difference between fine art and good graphic design in terms of importance and quality is very hard to see, and frankly speaking, good design is worth a hell of a lot more than bad art, of which we seem to be buried alive, more or less, as the Chinese get closer and closer to us. And you may have noticed that. You know, they each one of their ghastly things is the entire salary of a lifetime for most of us. And it's fairly shocking. Anyway, we're now concentrating on what we think we do best, which is really making connections visually for clients and their customers, and trying, as always, to make new images out of old cliches, which is a large part of what design seems to be all about, and also requires a lot more research to see that somebody hasn't already done it in Seoul or somewhere else in the world beforehand nowadays, because when we started 50 years ago, we really were sort of at that stage where we were defining what graphic design was all about, which was not what we thought it was when we went to school. Tom and I met at Yale, and took us some years to recover from that, which was, and it was a very good place to be, probably as good as anywhere else. But it still left you with somebody asked you what you did. If you couldn't say you were a graphic designer, because then you'd have to explain that and you'd bore yourself right out of your skull. And you had to say, well, I'm a commercial artist, and that would put an end to it. Then, a few years ago, maybe 20 now, or something like that, you could actually say you're a graphic designer, and the cab driver who asked you what you did, you would say, oh, that's great, my niece is a graphic designer, and he still didn't know what the hell it was, but he thought he did, and it put an end to the conversation, and that was fine, because it's hard to describe. I don't know what it is either, and I've been working at it for 50 years or more, collecting and repeating and trying to simplify fairly complicated stuff sometimes. Learning a little bit about it, but hopefully not too much, but just enough to get some jobs done. Now, this evening I'm going to show you mostly things that are a little more personal to me rather than the office, because in the office it's very cooperative most of the time. Everybody is allowed to interrupt anybody else and put their 2 cents in where it may be helpful, and it's a very open and efficient little environment. But my more personal stuff is because I really love garbage, and I really love accidents, and I find those kind of things to be very important to some important assignments that we've been involved in, I've been involved in over the years. But unexpected trivia brought to life in a new context is really quite exciting. So I'm going to start by showing you collages that I've made, and I've been making them for at least 50 years or longer, and they're just from wandering around the street and dealing with mail received, and saving envelopes, and stealing my children's drawings, and having to negotiate with them for whatever else comes of it, because I've stolen their work, and I think all my children are born negotiators, and most children are, I guess. And stamps and stickers and carbons from which I used to love and save, and even ask if I could have the carbon from the guy sitting next to me on an airplane, because they're so terrific. Of course, they don't have them anymore. It's all tickets that you wonder whether you even have a ticket, because it's written on a piece of paper and it looks like all the other emails that you have, and it's fairly easy to lose it. But these drawings, collages, I've been making, and I find them very helpful as a way of thinking without having to have any meetings at all about them. They don't get too repetitive, and the only bad part of it is that in case they have an exhibition, which means they have to get framed, they're pretty easy to store. when they get framed, it's tough, and I have a whole warehouse full of these things that when they're in frames. Now, I don't think they're the same. At least they're not the same to me, partly because I have good memories of where they came from, where the bits and pieces came from. If it's stamps and envelopes, I remember who wrote it to me and how much I liked them and how much of a good time we had together and so on. I don't know if you can see it well enough. I'm looking at a monitor which is barely the size of a postage stamp up there, so I can't tell what it is. But this was this particular collage was buying a little empty pad which Disney produced, for God's sake, and the first pages were white drawings of Mickey Mouse, and this is called Mickey Clapping, and I hope you can see it, but it's in there, that marvelous Disney drawing. And the accidents that happen when things are come to you in the mail are just without end, and sometimes they're just the moods change, and I have a different take on it. And you see that foot chin there. That's because I made my son Sam, who's now an architect in Tokyo and 26 years old, but when he was 7, I made him march around on India ink and make me footprints and handprints and even nose prints, and salvage them all and use them in collages, and found that if you put a mouth where a mouth is, it becomes a mouth and not a foot. And if it's vertical, where that upside down or that T is, that it becomes a nose, and so on. And these juxtapositions I find very, very important. And they lend themselves to various kinds of designs, and this is a poster for the United States Information Service about American graphic design in the Soviet Union. It traveled into 3 cities in what was Soviet Russia at the time. And this I was extremely proud of, because I presented to Gray Advertising, which I suppose most of you know is a very, very large agency with offices all over the world. And all I did, for which I was handsomely paid, was to say, just because these 2 Jewish guys decided to call themselves Gray Advertising is no reason to always print your stuff in gray. Let's print it in orange, and they've done it ever since. And you can see I made a little ligature out of the EY, and you can imagine that didn't take weeks and weeks. This symbol for Chase came about because Chase Manhattan Bank was under the illusion that they were going to shorten that very long name, Manhattan being a very long word, and they were going to do it within 2 or 3 years. Well, they did change it to Chase, but it took 17 years. In the meantime, in 1960, we designed about 9 abstract symbols, which were fairly rare, in fact, extremely rare in American corporate life. The only people that really used abstract symbols were the Japanese, who probably used them for centuries, as far as I know. But we did 9 symbols. This is the one that was selected by David Rockefeller at the time, because he was in charge of the project. And it's been made in place. They're trying to screw it up now, but not well. So it's too strong to be completely destroyed. But I must tell you that any one of the 9 would have done just as well. They were all simple, all concentrated, all very easy to move around in one color and work with typography. Mobile, we put in 38 years with 3 people on salary full-time. Then Exxon, a very big whale, swallowed this whale Mobile, and the phone stopped ringing altogether. We, in the meantime, had gone through 4 chairmen. But there it is, and it looks very modern. It's now quite a few years old. It was done in 1963. And it's very flexible. It's all over stations around the world. 24,000 in the United States and about the same number elsewhere. But after a while, as we were their consultants, I found you could play all kinds of games. And this is a tapestry here in Swindon. After all, they know what the Mobile logo is. The only people that go there are Mobile employees. I mean, why worry about it, whether it's quite legible or not? And the same thing went for their headquarters. This is the Flying Red O. It was done about, I don't know, maybe 66, 67, something like that, a new headquarters they have in Virginia. And they all know what it is, and so does everybody else. And in the research laboratory, a spinning tower 30, 40 feet high of Red O's could happen. And that was what happened. And we made all kinds of rationalizations, which were total bullshit about wheels and all that kind of thing. But it was really a nice letter, simple round letter in the typeface that we designed. Public broadcasting, PBS, we worked on for very many years. Actually, a great American designer, Herb Lubalin, started with this, and we turned it around to read from left to right and added a sort of shadow and a red one and made it somewhat different. But to be fair, he really started it. And this, which I suppose a lot of you have seen, the NBC Peacock, which was done many, many years ago too. And they had a terrible 11-feathered little bird that looked like a squashed fly in the newspapers. It was absolutely terrible. And the introduction of color television made it absolutely necessary to maintain that peacock, so we cut it down to 6 feathers and added color, and it's been in place ever since. And except for the people at the network and a few others, hardly anybody noticed that it went from 11 squash fly wings to a colorful peacock, and they all thought it was actually the same thing. That's in place all over America, at least, and we sensibly added NBC to it, just in case anybody was confused as to what it was all about, which is quite a few people probably. There's another network, a cable network, Showtime. I was always very pleased with this. Instead of making this spotlight around SHOW, to make it around SHO, and it makes a very nice typographic thing with the way the O flows out of the circle, and rationalized it on the grounds that Showtime is a very boring word for a big cable company anyway, and if we could shorten it down to show, because they weren't about to change it really, that would be very helpful and more efficient, and they absolutely agreed. So we use show quite often, as you can see on the lower right-hand corner of this nice distracting zebra. And this is another symbol for Univision, Spanish-speaking, sort of a bird.